Hello and welcome to the second day of Synergy Digital Talks. Today we're going to explore aid effectiveness from development partner perspectives. I'm Tatev Gurjan, today's moderator, a business development executive at Synergy. A couple of words about our yesterday's session for those of you who might have missed it. Let me introduce our company, Synergy, who is behind the organization. Synergy is a leading software provider specializing in the design and implementation of comprehensive systems for governments, international organizations, and NGOs. Over 26 years ago, we pioneered the notion of country-led aid information management and became a thought leader at the intersection of software and development effectiveness. And ever since, we have been supporting governments in aid management, offering our proprietary product, Synergy Development Assistance Database. It has become the most widely adopted aid information management system globally, with 37 country governments currently operating fully customized national systems. This said, we have launched Synergy Digital Talks as a platform for aid effectiveness and digital transformation practitioners to come together and explore the role of GovTech in advancing development effectiveness. The first session that took place yesterday offered valuable insights into digitalizing aid management and development coordination from government perspectives. We explored specific case studies of Seychelles, Ghana, and Zimbabwe. Today, we're going to examine the topic from development partner perspectives, and we're privileged to have on our panel Mr. Asor Nkang, Chair of the Governing Board of the International Aid Transparency Initiative. He oversees the governance of the Development Assistance Database, the official aid information management system of the Government of Nigeria. And let's welcome Mr. Lee Mitchell, Chief Technical Advisor for Aid Effectiveness at UNDP Nepal. He has a wealth of experience in the improvement of aid coordination mechanisms and structures in Nepal, Myanmar, and Timor-Leste. As a reminder to our online audience, you can address your questions to the group chat that you see or directly to Lili Mukarian. We will respond to all your questions at the end of the session. So to start with, let's look back at the past 20 years, focusing on the Busan Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, the Paris Declaration, and the Accra Agenda for Action. Lee and Henry, I would suggest that you both reflect on my first question. So how would you assess the state of aid effectiveness in general? What are some of the positive changes and trends that have emerged in aid effectiveness over these years? Lee, maybe you'll take the first lead.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks very much to Synergy for having us. It's fantastic to have an opportunity to talk about aid effectiveness and aid information management systems, an area of a niche area, but an area of passion nonetheless. So I mean, if we're looking back over the last, I would say we've seen perhaps three distinct changes. I think probably the most important shift that we've seen is I think that the locus of ownership has gradually moved in favor of the countries and the regions which aid is intended to assist. I think before Busan and most certainly before the Paris Declaration, we saw most of the major decisions were made in capitals and then presented to the partner governments as a kind of fait accompli. The advent of the Global Development Effectiveness Agenda has kind of changed this dynamic, and it's ensuring more and more that finance ministry officials, primarily, but ideally a broader range of partner country stakeholders, are present and able to give, I guess, what you might want to call free, prior, and informed consent regarding the provision of aid to their countries. I guess the second major shift that I've seen is the increasingly predominant role that data is playing in informing the way that aid is spent and informing the way that we determine whether aid is being spent effectively. I think with the post-Busan focus right now in Nepal, we're seeing how this monitoring process is becoming more and more reliant on data. And as a result, we're seeing a kind of expansion in the use of data portals, online systems, particularly, I think, in the last 5 years. And these tools are making it easier than to gain access to information on aid allocations, how aid money was spent, how aid money will be spent. And I think we're miles ahead of where we were, 5 to 10 years when 15 years ago, when these conversations were just beginning to be had. I guess perhaps the most important, but the final point I'd make is I think the development effectiveness agenda has really widened the tent in a way that has allowed civil society organizations to essentially anchor themselves into what is a global yet partner country-led process. So I've personally seen, particularly in East Timor, how the civil society organizations have latched onto the GPEDC as a way to anchor their lobbying efforts, their advocacy efforts when it comes to compelling development partners to do better. I remember the early days in East Timor, just after the Paris Agreement, when civil society organizations were really unfamiliar with the aid effectiveness agenda. The CSOs that I would speak to in Dili assumed that this was just another standard monitoring process where an international bureaucrat in a nice suit would come and visit for a few days, extract information, and then just jet off back to their air-conditioned capital, never to be heard from again. But in Timor, we were really lucky to have a truly passionate champion of the aid effectiveness agenda, as it was back then, in the form of Minister Emilia Pires. And she recognized early on how Timor could leverage the aid effectiveness, development effectiveness agenda, and enlist domestic civil society organizations as champions in her quest to compel development partners to do better. And later on, she saw the monitoring process as an opportunity also to showcase East Timor's success on an international stage. And this was a country that had transitioned rapidly from occupation to UN administration, to full sovereignty. And it also underwent a dramatic shift from almost complete aid dependency to relative aid independence, thanks to the strategic use of sovereign wealth funds just a few years later. So it was a fantastic case study, I think, of the development effectiveness agenda in action, with a champion at the country level in the form of the finance minister, who then used civil society organizations in her quest. So I guess there are hundreds of examples I could offer, but those, I think, are the three which resonated with me the most.
Thank you, Lee, for bringing up those examples and highlighting them. Henry, how would you assess the state of aid effectiveness?
Okay, thank you very much for having me, and warm greetings to everyone. I've already been introduced, so I would only add that I work with the Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning, Government of Nigeria, and also chair of the IATI Governing Board. My perspective would be that development cooperation continues to evolve as one of the key factors in advancing global development since Paris in 2005, and of course Accra and Busan 2011. Although success has not always been evident as expected, partly due to sometimes poor coordination in some cases, over-ambitious targets, unrealistic timelines, and budget constraints, and in some cases, political self-interest, particularly in situations where recipient countries do not respect the rule of law, or where recipient country governments act with impunity. However, from my perspective, I can see some level of positivity and enthusiasm towards the continuous modernization, deepening and broadening of development cooperation in the delivery of results since Paris, I can say. Actually, since the high-level forum on aid effectiveness in Rome in 2003 and leading to Busan 2011, these high-level events have rooted the formulation of principles towards effective aid delivery that, of course, led to the Busan Partnership Agreement endorsed by over 100 countries as the blueprint for maximizing the impact of it. And of course, reference to the GPEDC monitoring rounds. Now, just for a quick reminder of those principles, I talked about principles like ownership, which implies that developing countries set their own strategies for poverty reduction and, of course, improving their institutions and tackling corruption. Another principle is the alignment. Donor countries align behind these objectives and use local systems. And of course, you have harmonization, results, and mutual accountability. Donors and partners are accountable for development results. So the take here for me is that for it to be effective, all of those principles are essential, particularly ownership by the government and participation by the citizens. Also, strong administrative and institutional capacity are important, as well as sound policies and good public sector management. Talking about positive changes and trends that have emerged over the years, I would rather look at positive contributions of aid, like stimulating economic growth through supplementing domestic sources of finance, investments in climate and renewable energy, peace and security, democratic governance, gender equality and women empowerment, poverty reduction, and so on. I think that would be my interventions for now. Over to you.
Thank you, Henry. My question to Lee now: how has UNDP improved its coordination of needs and planned activities in beneficiary countries, looking at the Accra Agenda for Action? Can you share some specific examples of successful coordination efforts?
Sure. I mean, there's numerous examples, and I think one of the benefits from we can see from the use of the open data portals is that many of these case studies are now available to anybody who has the inclination to look for them. But I think maybe not to speak on behalf of the UNDP globally, but certainly I think we can see how the Accra Agenda for Action has informed how the UNDP operates today. It's almost part of its institutional DNA, as it is for most of the I guess the high performing development partners. But I think the UNDP and I guess the UN's more broadly, its commitment to enhancing coordination with partner countries, beneficiary countries, it's evident in almost everything it does. Working in Nepal now, and maybe in Myanmar, where I've worked previously, I can offer just a few examples. I mean, most importantly, it's this localization agenda that Henry mentioned just now. In Nepal, there was a devastating earthquake back in 2015, which I'm sure many of you would have heard about. So the UNDP sprung into action. It was able to reprioritize many of its projects to align with Nepal's immediate post-earthquake reconstruction agenda. An example can be seen in the comprehensive disaster. I mean, this was a project which was already in government's vision of achieving resilient and sustainable post-earthquake development. Interestingly, just to relate my answer to the use of aid information management systems, the UNDP was also instrumental in helping the government build in a new module into its existing aid information management system, which was designed to track post-earthquake ODA pledges, commitments, and disbursements. And that tool is still being used to this day, and we can see evidence of that in the most recent development cooperation report, which I think was published in September last year. So just that there's an example, I think, from Nepal of how the Accra Agenda has really helped organizations like the UNDP in terms of their kind of long-term development approach, but also in terms of the UNDP is able to structure itself in a way that it is able to respond quickly and immediately to disasters when they might strike. I think another kind of area which we can see is monitoring and evaluation, the kind of capacity building agenda. Another example from Nepal is to do with micro enterprise, the micro enterprise development program. This was a project by UNDP in Australia. They were focused on building robust monitoring and evaluation mechanisms for the project, but also that could be used in other contexts. Benefiting, I think it was 130,000 individuals in total by the end of that project, mostly women. I think the way that the UNDP now provides capacity building is very, very different to what it was pre-Paris and pre-Accra. I think it's done much more often through the provision of individuals, I guess, like myself, who are embedded within the institutions responsible for program implementation, and less sitting outside those institutions. I think you're seeing less and less the positioning of TA in the UN, and more positioning of technical assistance inside partner country governments. So yeah, I think Nepal and Myanmar, or at least Myanmar prior to the very unfortunate coup, I think there are two really strong examples of how the UN and again most of the major development partners have kind of recalibrated themselves in order to be far more responsive and proactive to the development priorities of the countries in which they're working. Again, many other examples, but those are just a few that pop into mind.
Thank you. Now let's shift to the International Aid Transparency Initiative. As you know, it was launched at the third high-level forum on aid effectiveness in Accra. And as a matter of fact, Synergy is a member of the IATI Technical Advisory Group and has been actively involved in the initiative since its launch in 2008. We have participated in the design of the IATI data standard, and we have seen the core, the essence of this standard. So, Henry, my question to you now, what role does the initiative play in enhancing aid data accuracy, timeliness, and transparency?
Okay, thank you very much for that question, Tete. If you would allow me, I'll just provide a little bit of a background on the International Aid Transparency. As you may be aware, and as you have just mentioned, it was launched at the third high-level forum on aid effectiveness in Accra in 2008 as a voluntary multi-stakeholder initiative that seeks to increase the transparency of development cooperation and increase its effectiveness in tackling poverty. So in effect, IATI was conceptualized to support donors in meeting their Accra commitments on transparency and simultaneously serve the information needs of developing countries to enable the planning and management of national budgets based on more accurate and timely information on resource flows. In fact, I can say that the outcome document for the fourth high-level forum on aid effectiveness in Busan included a specific reference to IATI, requiring all Busan stakeholders to implement a common open standard for electronic publication of timely, comprehensive, and forward-looking information on resources provided through development cooperation. As of today, I can say that more than 1,600, more than 1,600 organizations publish development cooperation data to the IATI standard, including bilateral and multilateral donors, as well as national and international NGOs, humanitarian actors, private philanthropic foundations, development finance institutions, and also there are over 1 million development and humanitarian activities published to the IATI standard. However, it could be argued that increase in transparency is not an end in itself, but an essential step towards improving the coordination, accountability, and effectiveness of aid resources to maximize their impact on the world's poorest and most vulnerable people. It is in that sense that IATI encourages all organizations that provide or spend aid resources to publish information about their activities using the IATI standard. This is a set of rules and guidance to ensure information is easy to access and also, but also easy to use as well. So in terms of the role that IATI plays in enhancing aid data timeliness and accuracy, my perspective as an end user is that IATI data helps us to meet the needs of a wide range of stakeholders in international development. For example, IATI data helps governments of developing countries like Nigeria, for instance, to access up-to-date or you may say timely information on which development and humanitarian organizations are operating in the country. IATI also helps donors and multilateral agencies to understand where their spending will have the greatest impact. In the same way, it helps civil society organizations to follow the money. It also helps citizens and journalists around the world who need information on external inflows to different countries to hold their government to account on their spendings, but also plays a role in ensuring that good quality and transparent data is publicly available for use by stakeholders towards the achievements of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think I'll stop there for now and over to you, Tatev.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Maybe, Lee, you would also like to tackle the role of IATI from the development partners' perspective.
Sure, absolutely. Look, I think Henry captured it perfectly. I don't think I could have said it better. But I mean, I guess it's from my perspective, the IATI has become central. It's become central to the work that I do as both an aid data user, as someone who works together with partner countries and helps them use aid data, but also working for an institution that is an aid data provider. There's nothing else like it. And I guess I have to be honest, I didn't really realize how essential IATI would become to these broader conversations about development effectiveness until I started really diving into the standard about 10 years ago. I mean, let's be frank, it's in many ways far superior to the DAC creditor reporting scheme. It's more detailed, it's more nuanced, it's more granular. It provides much of the information that recipient countries need. And of course, it's timely as well. We don't need to wait for 24 months or so for the data to come out. I think more and more development partners are reporting on a monthly, if not quarterly basis to IATI. So it's timely, it's comprehensive, it's accurate, it's trustworthy. But I mean, in addition to that, unlike the creditor reporting scheme, which I have a deal of respect for, I think one of the beauties of the IATI standard is that it is inclusive. It's a big tent. It's got obviously the aid providers who are there informing the development of the data, such as Henry and myself and partner countries. They're also there in the room guiding the development of the standard. And as you mentioned, it's also got aid information management system providers there involved in the discussion. Of course, it's central to how software providers build their products over the coming years. They need to ensure that their products are compatible with this standard. And so it's in many ways, I think it's just become central to the conversation about aid effectiveness. And I can't remember what life was like without it. But maybe just one other point, I think. one of the beauties of IATI is that we've got not only the major bilateral and multilateral aid providers reporting to IATI, we're seeing more and more, as Henry mentioned, the actual aid implementing organization, the INGOs, the NGOs, private sector partners to an extent, they're also reporting their aid to the IATI standard. I mean, that really helps, because it's fantastic if we have USAID or FCDO or the UNDP reporting to the IATI standard. But if we can also have their implementing partners report to the IATI standard, then that means that we can follow the money. Traceability becomes that much easier. And that's something that, of course, the creditor reporting system doesn't provide for. Not a criticism of the CRS, it wasn't designed with that in mind. It was designed with a completely different set of priorities. But these are just some of the reasons why I find, at least, IATI has become central to this whole conversation, and I can't remember a time where I can't remember life without it.
Maybe more elaborating on this topic, Henry, would you comment on the importance of integrating aid information systems with IATI standards? I realize that this is an important step, so maybe you'll elaborate more on this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very, very important, because one of the challenges we have in aid information management system, and just last week I was doing a training on use of data in effective aid coordination with country reporting systems, that is with countries' aid information management systems. We normally have the challenge of untimely reporting of data. We also have the challenge of quick turnover on the side of the donors, focal points, because sometimes the donors recruit on a contract basis and assign the responsibility of reporting organizational data to the focal point. And if the focal point leaves at the expiration of the contract and there's no replacement, then there will be a void. And then also the role of reporting data will also suffer. There will be a gap. So in that sense, if we're able to integrate IATI data or automatically import IATI data into country systems, then it will be able to fill that data gap, and then we'll be able to have more timely, more accurate, more comprehensive data. And of course, usually this data is also validated at country level, and the data can be used. And in that sense, then we can be able to satisfy the demand side of data, because as a key data user, I face increasing pressure from stakeholders requesting for data. For example, the National Parliament, the Budget Office of the Federation, the Central Bank that usually uses the data for the computation of balance of payment in the country, the Debt Management Office. So all of these stakeholders demand for data, and to be able to meet up with the data demand, then it is essential, absolutely essential, that we work towards integrating IATI data with country systems. That would be my perspective. Over to you, Tati.
Thank you. Now, looking forward to the present and future of aid management, I would like to ask Lee a question on transitioning from an aid information management system to a development finance management information system. As we're aware, the UNDP guidance note on making DFMIS work for the evolving development cooperation landscape proposes the establishment of a DFMIS in support of enhanced development effectiveness and realization of national priorities. I also know, and you mentioned, that your current capacity as the Chief Technical Advisor for Aid Effectiveness at UNDP Nepal is the responsibility for upgrading the existing aid information management system to a development finance information management system. Now, in general, Lee, what are the objectives of this transition?
Well, great. This is a really fascinating area. Maybe just very briefly, I do think that DFMIS are the future. And I think it's interesting because in the early days, leading up to and maybe just after the Paris Declaration, we witnessed this surge of aid information management systems, and I think Synergy was a major contributor to that, Development Gateway and some others. Donors and partner country governments realized that with this massive scale up in ODA in order to meet the Millennium Development Goals, as they were back then, this was going to result in a massive surge in spending, and we needed to make sure that we could determine whether this money was used effectively. We needed monitoring frameworks, and crucially, those monitoring frameworks required data. So this is essentially where this boom in aid information management systems came from. But let's just be frank. I think over the last 10 years, there's been somewhat of a waning in enthusiasm for aid information management systems, regrettably. And I think there's a few reasons for this. Aid information management systems are viewed, and in reality they are, very technical IT solutions. And I think oftentimes when they were deployed in those early days, they were designed and implemented as a software solution, but without sufficient consideration as to how partner countries and aid providers would need to adapt their kind of institutions to how the institutions which house the aid information management system would need to change, and how their engagement with development partners would need to change. Also how finance ministries would need to adapt their relationships with other parts of the finance ministry, with budget and treasury, and how the finance ministry would adapt its relationship with line ministries when it comes to collecting information that would feed into these aid information management systems. I think there's certainly cases where that was done, but in many cases, I think that thinking wasn't done sufficiently. So what we had was a software solution which was provided to a finance ministry, fantastic looking, but as soon as Henry mentions, once contracts come to end, when funding dries up, when priorities shift, we find that buy-in to the system drops off somewhat, which is a shame. And I think maybe it's somewhat controversially, I think one of the other challenges that we've seen over the last 10 years is a lack of IATI-inspired products. And so what I mean is, I think many people expected after Busan, after Hillary Clinton's announcement back in 2011 that USAID would be joining IATI, I think many people imagined that there would be this a wide range of different tools and portals and software packages that would be built in alignment with the IATI standard. And I think we're seeing a lot of it now, but 10 years ago there wasn't really a lot of competition in the market. And so I think as a result, many of the aid information management systems that we saw, 5-10 years ago, are not, I guess, what we could say IATI compliant. There have been a lot of pilot projects around the world where it's been proven that these systems can become compatible with IATI data and can import IATI data, but oftentimes that's requiring that there's a need to retrofit existing systems to become compatible with the IATI standards, as opposed to having these systems built from the ground up in compliance with the IATI standard. In Myanmar, we built the Mohinga aid information management system quite successfully, which was built around the IATI standard, which allowed for single-click import of IATI data. It worked quite well, but I think that was a rarity. And I think I'll get to my core point in a moment. But I think the third challenge was, and it's tied to the first two. After Addis, as part of this billions to trillions agenda, whatever you wish to call it, we've realized that partner countries obviously can't rely on ODA alone in order to meet global sustainable development goals. And unfortunately, many of the aid information management systems that have been deployed over the last 15 years have been quite ODA-centric. Now, this then takes me to the questions with respect to development finance information management systems. I think this is where we need to go. This is the future. I think we need to take the aid information management systems that we have and build into them a range of different new tools and modules, one of which, and just one of which, is IATI integration. We also need to be ensuring that these systems integrate better with other parts of government. In Nepal, it's the line ministry budget information system. We need to be building in integrations with the Nepal Investment Board, with the central bank. We need to be able to either track a wider form of development finance flows within the AIMS, or we need to ensure that the AIMS is compatible with other systems so that we can visualize data from other places. Now, the great thing about the IATI standard is that it has been built with this in mind. Can track a much wider range of development finance flows, much broader. Yeah. But I think it's still early days. We're not yet seeing, I think, the true power of IATI and the true power of development finance information management system. Despite that technical note that UNDP put together back in 2018, there's only, I think, 3 or 4 decent quality examples of this being put into action. And I think Nepal will be one of those examples over the next 6 to 12 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. And I agree with you that this is an evolving process, and the technology was not the same in the past 10, 15 years. So totally agree, and it's also my belief, my firm belief, that the FMIS is the future, and we'll also explore this possibility in our 3rd session tomorrow, so don't miss it. Now, in your previous response, you also mentioned open budget portals. Now let's a bit elaborate on this. They are increasingly used for reporting purposes. Is UNDP utilizing these portals to enhance transparency and accountability? What's the practice?
Absolutely. This is, I think, and again, although I'm with UNDP now, I think we're seeing it across a range of different partners. Their open budget portals are, many of them, which look absolutely fantastic. I have to say that they're becoming more and more, I guess, commonplace. I think commonplace maybe downplays their role, but they're becoming expected. When I need information on what a development partner is doing in Nepal or Timor or Myanmar, well, the first place I'll go is the partner country aid information management system. I'll then seek out data from IATI. And if I can't find the data there, then I'll seek out the open data portal of the major aid providers. And there's an expectation that I will be able to find the information I need from that portal. Then there's also, I think, a growing expectation that the information that I find in that portal will be the same as the information that I can extract from the IATI, the development finance tool, because I think more and more these open data portals are bringing to life the IATI data, which these donors have been reporting for many, many years now, but maybe without getting the credit they deserve for that hard work. So yes, we in the UNDP are putting a huge amount of information up online through open data portals. Real-time reporting as a massive push towards interactive data visualization, going much further than just a simple bar chart and a pie chart. There's many, many different ways that we can see a lot of this data come to life. There's some fantastic examples across the UN system. I think we're seeing a solid investment into not just, well, I think previously we'd seen investment into reporting this data, and now we're seeing a much arguably more important investment into making sure that this information is accessible. And by accessible, I don't simply mean that an individual can download this information in an Excel or a CSV sheet. The information, comes to them as opposed to forcing them to go dig through a 1,000-row Excel spreadsheet. But I mean, I guess what we need to, it's not just about presenting numbers, is what I'm trying to say. It's about telling a story of development impact. But I think there's still more that we could and therefore must be doing. And one of those things I think is that we need to be reporting more on not just what's working well, but maybe what's not working so well. We need to be able to confidently report on our failures. I think there was a statistic I heard somewhere that in Australia, where I'm from, I think 1 in 6 small businesses fails, and yet it seems that every aid project that you read about has been a roaring success. We know that's not necessarily the case. But here again, the IATI standard could be used to its much fuller and richer potential. So the IATI standard allows for reporting on outcomes, impacts, results reporting. But unfortunately, this is one of the lesser used elements of the standard as far as I'm aware. So I think over the next few years that the next frontier will be reporting on impact, outputs, outcomes, the use of indicators, all in accordance with the IATI standard. I think that's where we need to go.
Thank you so much. Maybe my next question will be a kind of continuation of this. Henry, for you, how engaged is IATI in identifying the specific needs and priorities of beneficiary countries? All this to ensure that aid is aligned with their development goals and challenges. Please take the floor.
In fact, thank you very much for that question. IATI has done extensive work in the area of having need assessments from country to understand their specific requirements. In the past couple of years, I was part of the team that provided feedback to the IATI Secretariat on the kind of requirements that the partner countries want to see in the data. And that led to the development of the country development finance data tool, which today is a very, very effective tool. In fact, in Nigeria, we rely on that tool to download data that we provide to, we make analysis and provide to various stakeholders, particularly the National Assembly, and as I mentioned earlier, the Central Bank of Nigeria for the computation of balance of payment. But also, we produce the annual development cooperation report. I mean, Leah just mentioned that Nepal produced their development cooperation report in the last one in December. We also produce annual development cooperation report, and we rely on the data that we download from IATI. And that is because IATI has been able to simplify the data through the country development finance data tool, and which directly speaks to our requirements. Although it's not perfect yet because we still have issues with location data, where most of these projects are located. But I can say we have at least 80% reliance on that data at the moment. The IATI Secretariat, between last year and early this year, conducted a series of trainings on partner countries. There was a training in Southeast Asia, in Bangkok, on how partner governments, including even development partners, can assess data using the country finance data tool and conduct analysis with the data based on their specific requirements. There were also trainings in East Africa, in Kigali, Rwanda. There was a regional training in Abuja that brought together participants from West African countries and Central African countries, including civil society organizations. And just recently, there have been a training in Cameroon, called bringing together development partners and civil society, all training them how to use the country development finance data. So I think the Secretariat is doing a very great work, and partner countries, civil society organizations, and even donors are also finding value in what IATI is doing. Thank you.
Thank you. I think our conversation could last for 1 hour more, I guess. But at this moment, I will have to give the floor to our audience because we have some questions from there. And first of all, of course, thank you to our speakers, Lee and Henry. It was really insightful. And let's see the questions that we have from the audience. By the way, other questions might also come. We still have some 10, 15 minutes. Let me read the first one. Just a second. So it's a question about COVID global crisis. And it says, how has the COVID pandemic shaped the way policymakers and development actors think about the role of GovTech? Did it arise a paradigm shift? It was not directed to any one of you, so you are free to volunteer. Lee, Henry, who would like to take the question?
Maybe I could just say something very, very briefly.
Please.
It's a really interesting question. It's a really interesting question. And I suppose from where I sit, putting, I guess, adjusting my aid effectiveness cap, I think in the early days of the pandemic, there was a huge amount of talk on this great reset. There were some fantastic, very ambitious ideas floated about this. And then I guess we could discuss that in further details. But I think within the kind of confines of how these conversations have impacted the way that partner countries manage aid, in many cases, I think is somewhat of a business as usual. From the finance ministry's perspective, the way that we managed aid in all these new commitments, these COVID-19 commitments, was similar to how we would manage aid flows in any other major crisis. There was a marker implemented into the aims, a COVID-19 marker, where a partner was able to identify whether a project or a transaction was relevant to Myanmar's COVID-19 response, and we were able to, in more or less real time, generate reports on new forms of finance targeting COVID-19, both grants, loans, and in-kind assistance. And I think Nepal has done something very similar. I mentioned previously the earthquake module that was designed back in 2015. Well, Nepal did something very, very similar with COVID-19. They developed a COVID-19 module, they integrated that into the existing aid information management system, and they encouraged very strongly for all development partners to ensure that any assistance they provide was tracked accordingly. So I would love to say that the COVID-19 and this great reset has fundamentally some kind of paradigm shift when it comes to how aid is managed at the ground level. I haven't seen it, but look, my colleague Henry might have a different perspective.
Yeah, I have a different perspective actually, Leah, and the perspective I'd like to share is that COVID-19 actually led to increase an investment in digital transformation, I should say. But that increase in investment didn't impact much, particularly in developing countries. And I can give you an example with Nigeria, and I've often shared this, that each time we have virtual meetings such as this, we always face the challenge of strong internet connectivity. So that is to say, we don't have strong infrastructure that will guarantee very good internet connectivity to be able to stay on meetings like this. So in that sense, we are left behind. So, and the global community is saying leave no one behind, but we are left behind when it comes to infrastructure that will guarantee strong internet. So sometimes it's an impediment to our effective and efficient participation in meetings such as this. So that's the perspective I would like to share.
Thank you both for sharing your perspective on this question. We have one more question for Lee. It says that many donors are also users of aid information management systems. Does UNDP ensure that donor-specific needs and requirements are met within these systems?
So I suppose, maybe I'll take that question from the perspective of UNDP, which is often an organization which provides funding for partner countries to build their aid information management systems, and maybe whether the UNDP is able to, accommodate both the needs of aid providers and data users. It's an interesting question. I think there's a balancing act. Donors have their unique mandates and priorities. And I think for an aid information management system or a DFMIS to be functional and sustainable in the long term, those requirements need to be taken into account. Constant, consistent engagement sessions, trainings, feedback loops, iterative refinements, They all need to take place in order to ensure that the donor requirements are taken on board and integrated. But as Henry mentioned earlier, one of the challenges which money can't solve is this issue of staff turnover. Oftentimes, what I find is that the individual in the donor organization responsible for inputting the data is very rarely the same individual who is tasked with using the information. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. If a cell is left blank or if data is reported late, oftentimes the individual in the donor organization providing that information, there is no blowback, there is no consequence. But for us in the finance ministry trying to use this information, or a wider set of development partners looking to extract information from an aims in order to determine how they allocate resources, this is a real struggle. So, but of course, what I described just then, those engagement sessions, feedback loops, and iterative upgrades, they all cost money, time and money. It doesn't need to be prohibitively expensive. There's new open source software available. Many of the aims providers have made a commitment to making the code available to the partner countries to use. But I guess another kind of way to look at it is there's this kind of perennial challenge around what aid information management systems need to capture. Oftentimes, and I'm guilty of this, these systems are designed to capture more information than what development partners are able and willing to provide. And in some cases, again, I'm guilty of this, these systems are designed to capture more information than the recipient country necessarily requires. For example, an aid information management system will typically ask a user to break down a project based on locations. I think Henry made reference to this earlier. The IATI standard will tell me whether or not this aid project is implemented in Nepal or Myanmar or a region, but it doesn't allow us to go dig into the subnational level, and aid information management systems do that. But of course, if you're asking an individual to report that breakdown, transaction is broken down and directed to subnational locations based on that original estimate, and that's not necessarily the case. And the question is then, do you ask development partners to report on the geographic spread of every single transaction, or do you make a safe estimate, a safe guess, and break it down at the activity level? I know this is getting maybe a little bit more technical than what our audience is interested in. But yes, I mean, essentially, we need to strike that balance between asking donors for information that we can use, but while not overwhelming the poor, often relatively junior level individual in the donor organization who's tasked with reporting data into these systems. And again, the IATI standard helps to solve many of these problems, at least data entry problems, by ensuring that we can pull data that's already been validated from the headquarters level into to local systems. But look, I've rambled on a little bit too much at a technical level, but that's just my brief observation.
Thank you, Lee. And we have one last question here that we'll manage to answer. It says that yesterday we saw during the government perspective session that there was some challenging issues regarding aid effectiveness reforms. These issues include capacity constraint, resistance to change, quality of data, etc. The question is, what is your appreciation as development partners and how to overcome these issues?
Well, I can jump in here and quickly say that, I can quickly say one of the things that would help is that countries should be able to have their aid policies in place, because their aid policies will be a document that will be binding the relationship between the donor and the recipient country. And usually for aid policy to be acceptable to all the stakeholders should be carried along, including civil society organizations, the citizens themselves, the donors, the various stakeholders among the government, and they now define the relationship, how aid will be carried out in that particular country. So in that sense, it will help to address some of the issues. But if there is an absence of aid policy, then it will allow those kind of issues to surface. Yep, over to you.
Thank you, Henry. I think we'll wrap up today on this point. I would like to express my gratitude to our esteemed speakers, Henry, Asor Nkang, and Lee Mitchell, for sharing your valuable insights and expertise today. I think it was a success, and I would like to tune in our audience for our tomorrow's session, which will showcase how technology, and particularly Synergy Development Assistance Database, addresses the challenges identified in our first government perspective session and today's development partners session. So thank you all for participation, and see you tomorrow.